He was humiliated in front of the entire coffee shop for wearing nothing more than a red MAGA hat, a symbol of his identity. The barista smugly scrawled the word idiot in the foam of his cappuccino, certain this customer deserved no respect. What no one realized was that this man was the new owner of the very establishment, quietly observing to decide who would stay on his team. What happened next was a lesson none of them would ever forget. The morning sun spilled through the large glass windows of a bustling corner café, casting golden highlights on the polished counters and wooden tables. Inside, the air was thick with the comforting aroma of fresh espresso, mingling with the soft hum of casual conversations and the occasional clatter of ceramic cups. Customers lounged at tables, scrolling through their phones, while a few stood in line, distractedly glancing at the menu above the counter. Behind the counter, Jake, a 25-year-old barista with tousled chestnut hair and a sharp jawline, was anything but thrilled. His sarcastic smirk and occasional heavy sighs hinted at a morning already testing his patience. Dressed in a snug black t-shirt emblazoned with the cafe's logo and a dark green apron, Jake moved mechanically, his hazel eyes darting to the door every time it jingled. And then, it happened. A man walked in wearing a bright red MAGA hat, its bold white letters catching the light like a beacon. Jonathan Myers, a 50-year-old white man with neatly trimmed gray hair and piercing blue eyes, entered with an air of calm confidence. He wore a crisp white button-down shirt, dark jeans that hung comfortably, and polished brown loafers. His expression was relaxed, almost amused as he paused to take in the atmosphere before stepping toward the counter. Jake froze, his jaw tightening at the sight of the hat. To him, it was more than an accessory. It was a provocation. His grip on the steam wand tightened momentarily before he plastered on a thin, forced smile. Jonathan reached the counter, giving Jake a polite nod. "Good morning," he said, his voice even and warm. Jake tilted his head, his smirk widening with an unmistakable edge of mockery. "Well, good morning to you, sir," he replied, drawing out the words. "That's quite the bold fashion statement." Jonathan didn't flinch, his calm gaze fixed on Jake. "Thanks," he said lightly, the corners of his mouth twitching into the faintest smile. "I'll take a cappuccino, please." Jake's smirk deepened as he punched the order into the register with exaggerated flair. "Of course, one cappuccino coming right up," he said, his tone dripping with theatrical politeness. The customers nearby began to take notice. A woman sitting at the table glanced up from her laptop, her brow furrowing as she exchanged a glance with the man across from her. A teenager in the corner pulled out his phone, discreetly aiming it at the unfolding interaction. Jonathan, unfazed, reached into his pocket for his wallet. Jake, meanwhile, turned to the espresso machine, his hands working with unnecessary force as he muttered something under his breath. The tension hung in the air, unnoticed by some but palpable to others. As Jonathan handed over his payment, Jake glanced at the MAGA hat one last time before giving a mock salute. "Enjoy your coffee," he said, his voice low and sarcastic. Jonathan, unbothered, leaned slightly closer. "I intend to," he replied with a calm smile that hinted he was already 2 steps ahead. The sound of milk steaming filled the cafe, but it wasn't enough to drown out the quiet whispers and occasional snickers of the onlookers. Jake's irritation was clear, but Jonathan's serene demeanor made it impossible to ignore the growing interest of those around them. The hum of the coffee shop buzzed with life, whirring espresso machines, clinking ceramic mugs, and the low murmur of conversations. But around Jake and Jonathan, the atmosphere shifted. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut with a butter knife. Jake, now thoroughly entertained by his own sense of self-righteousness, announced the next order. "One cappuccino." He said it with mock cheerfulness, glaring at Jonathan as he grabbed a clean mug. Instead of his usual brisk movements, Jake slowed down. He exaggerated every step, tamping the espresso with an overly theatrical flair. The line behind Jonathan grew longer, but Jake didn't care. He was performing for his own satisfaction now. When the milk was steamed to a frothy perfection, Jake carefully poured it over the espresso. Normally, he'd attempt a simple heart or a rosette to add a touch of artistry, but not today. Today, he had a message. Using the precision of a practiced barista, Jake swirled the milk to spell out a single word in the foam. Idiot. He smirked as he admired his handiwork. Placing the cup on the counter with exaggerated politeness, Jake slid it toward Jonathan. Your cappuccino, he said, his tone dripping with fake courtesy. Jonathan picked up the cup, his expression unreadable. He studied the foam for a moment before raising it to eye level. Interesting design, he remarked calmly, his voice steady. Let's hope the coffee is as bold as the art. The nearby customers couldn't help but notice. A young woman seated by the window discreetly angled her phone to record the interaction. A man in a business suit whispered to his companion, and another patron stifled a nervous laugh. Jake, still reveling in his small act of rebellion, turned to his co-workers for validation, but instead of admiration, he saw their unease. What? It's just a joke, he muttered defensively, but their sideways glances suggested they weren't so sure. Jonathan, meanwhile, took a deliberate sip of the cappuccino, his face betraying no hint of annoyance or embarrassment. He set the cup down gently and pulled out his phone. Jake leaned in, expecting some kind of outburst. Instead, Jonathan tapped his screen a few times and smiled. Ah, Jonathan said, his tone light and conversational. Just sent a quick email. I'd like to thank you for this creative expression. Jake blinked. An email? To who? Jonathan leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough to make the moment more intimate, and far more intimidating. The regional manager, and the CEO, while I was at it. Jake's smirk faltered. The other baristas exchanged wide-eyed glances. Jonathan straightened, brushing invisible lint off his blazer. But don't worry, Jake. I included a picture of your artistic skills. I'm sure they'll appreciate it as much as I do. The murmurs around the coffee shop grew louder, and several people openly stared at Jake, who was now as pale as the milk he'd frothed. The young woman with the phone muttered, "Oh my God, this is going viral." Jonathan picked up his cappuccino and took another leisurely sip. Delicious, he said with a small approving nod. Though I'd recommend you work on your customer service skills. You never know who might walk in next. And with that, he turned and walked toward the exit, leaving Jake to stew in the consequences of his little performance. The final image of the chapter? Jake, staring at the door, the word idiot, practically reflected in his wide, horrified eyes. The door to the coffee shop swung open, and in walked a woman who immediately commanded attention. Her sharp black suit and sleek bob haircut gave her an air of no-nonsense authority. She held a tablet in one hand and exuded a calm confidence that silenced the hum of conversation around her. She strode directly to Jonathan, her heels clicking against the tiled floor like a metronome. Stopping just in front of him, she broke into a warm, professional smile. "Good morning, Mr. Myers," she greeted, her voice smooth but loud enough to carry across the room. "How are you finding the atmosphere in your new establishment?" A ripple of confusion passed through the coffee shop. Jake, who had been trying to blend into the background, froze mid-step. His face drained of color as the words sank in. "New establishment?" One of the baristas whispered to a colleague. "Wait, new owner? Is she talking about him?" They both glanced at Jonathan, who had been quietly sipping his cappuccino just moments before. Jonathan stood, brushing imaginary crumbs from his blazer. His smile had shifted into something sharper, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "The atmosphere is enlightening," he said, his tone casual but loaded with implication. He turned his attention to Jake, who now looked like he wished the ground would swallow him whole. "You know, Jake," Jonathan began, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that silenced the entire shop. "I've always believed that observing people in their natural environment tells you everything you need to know. It really helps highlight what needs improvement." Jake's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His usually smug demeanor was nowhere to be seen. The air around him seemed to thicken as every pair of eyes in the shop locked onto him. Linda, unfazed by the tension, turned to address the staff. Her tone was brisk, but not unkind. "Attention, everyone. Please gather in the conference room in 15 minutes. We'll be discussing some operational changes." The other employees exchanged uneasy glances. One brave soul ventured a quiet, "Operational changes?" Linda didn't elaborate. She simply nodded and made a note on her tablet before turning back to Jonathan. "I'll ensure we have everything ready for your review." "Excellent," Jonathan replied, his gaze never leaving Jake. "I'm looking forward to discussing the team's strengths and weaknesses." Jake's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. The word weaknesses felt like a hammer poised over his head. Linda turned and headed toward the back office, her heels clicking with the finality of a closing door. Jonathan picked up his cappuccino again, giving Jake a polite, almost pitying smile. "Don't worry, Jake. I'm sure you'll find the meeting illuminating." The chapter ended with Jake standing frozen behind the counter, his once cocky demeanor replaced by sheer dread. Around him, the coffee shop buzzed with murmurs, and the young woman with the phone whispered, "Oh, this is definitely going online." The small conference room of the coffee shop was crammed with nervous employees. The air was heavy with tension, broken only by the faint hum of the AC unit overhead. Jake sat in the corner, hunched over like a sulking teenager, his hands fidgeting with a paper coffee cup that now looked dangerously close to tearing. Jonathan stood in the center of the room, the picture of calm authority. He took his time scanning the faces of the employees, his eyes finally settling on Jake, who visibly squirmed under the gaze. "Well," Jonathan began, his tone conversational yet razor-sharp. "I bought this coffee shop because I believe in its potential. It's not just a business, it's a place where people from all walks of life can come together over something as simple as a cup of coffee." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "But," Jonathan continued, his voice dropping a notch, "what I saw today reminded me how easily trust and goodwill can be destroyed when personal biases are allowed to fester in the workplace." The employees exchanged uneasy glances. Jake stared at the table, wishing he could melt into it. Jonathan's gaze locked onto him. "Jake," he said, his tone steady but carrying the weight of authority, "I understand that everyone is entitled to their opinions. That's the beauty of this country. But what you did today wasn't about expressing an opinion. It was about using your position to demean someone. That kind of behavior has no place here." Jake opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. Linda, standing by the door with her tablet, cleared her throat. "As part of our company policy," she said crisply, "we have zero tolerance for actions that create a hostile environment. Jake, you'll be temporarily suspended while completing a mandatory course on professional ethics." The room fell silent, save for the rustling of someone shifting uncomfortably in their seat. Jake finally managed to stammer, I'm sorry. It was just a joke." Jonathan raised a hand, cutting him off. "Jake, apologies are meaningless unless they're backed by action. I'm less interested in hearing sorry and more interested in seeing that you've learned from this." The room seemed to collectively hold its breath. Jake nodded stiffly, his face pale. Jonathan softened slightly, addressing the rest of the team. "I'm not here to micromanage or make your lives harder. I want to make this place better, for the employees and the customers. But that only works if we treat each other with respect, no exceptions." The employees nodded, a mix of relief and renewed resolve on their faces. Jonathan's expression lightened as he turned back to the group. "Now, unless anyone else has decided to insult their customers today, I suggest we all get back to work. Linda will provide updates on the next steps." A small chuckle rippled through the room, breaking the tension. Linda gave a tight, approving smile and gestured for the team to leave. As the employees filed out, Jake lingered awkwardly, avoiding Jonathan's eyes. Jonathan didn't say another word, but gave Jake a pointed look that spoke volumes. This isn't over. The chapter closed with Jake slipping out the door, the sound of his crumpling coffee cup echoing behind him, while Jonathan turned to Linda and said with a smirk, "Well, that went about as smoothly as a burnt latte." The video hit the internet like a thunderstorm. Shot from a shaky smartphone camera, it captured the moment perfectly. Jake's smug delivery of the cappuccino, the bold idiot in the foam, and Jonathan's calm yet devastating response. The clip quickly racked up views, with thousands of comments pouring in. "Class act! That's how you handle disrespect, read one. Jake's lucky his boss didn't fire him on the spot. What a pro, said another. Memes followed, as they always do. Someone photoshopped Jonathan's calm face onto a superhero body with the caption, "Not all heroes wear capes. Some drink cappuccinos." While Jake became a reluctant internet villain, Jonathan was hailed as a paragon of professionalism. The coffee shop saw a surge in customers, some hoping to catch a glimpse of the now famous owner, others just inspired by the story. 2 weeks later, the shop had settled back into its usual rhythm. Jake returned for his first shift since the incident, walking through the door with none of his former swagger. His shoulders were slightly hunched, and he seemed to avoid eye contact with everyone. Jonathan was behind the counter, inspecting a delivery. He glanced up as Jake approached, holding his breath like he was bracing for impact. Instead, Jake stopped a few feet away and cleared his throat. "Mr. Myers," he began, his voice quieter than usual. I just wanted to say thank you for giving me another chance. I've thought a lot about what happened, and, I get it now. I really do." Jonathan studied him for a moment, then smiled. A genuine, warm smile. "We all screw up, Jake. What matters is what you do afterward. Welcome back." Jake's relief was almost comical. He nodded, muttered another thank you, and headed to the back to start his shift. Linda appeared moments later, her ever-present tablet in hand. "I see Jake's back," she noted, raising an eyebrow. "He is," Jonathan replied, a touch of humor in his voice. "Let's see if the ethics course sticks. If not, I hear we're hiring." Linda smirked, but didn't comment further. The chapter ended as Jonathan turned back to his work, the sound of the coffee grinder humming in the background. Above the counter, someone had added a new sign. "Respect is the secret ingredient to great coffee." A customer snapped a picture of it, posting it online with the caption, "Jonathan Myers does it again. A true legend." The story ended on a high note, a reminder that professionalism and respect can turn even the bitterest moments into something surprisingly sweet.